Hi everybody, I'm Verkeya of Verkeya Speaks, and I'm here today with Keone Davis to talk about miscarriage, child loss, IVF, and having a rainbow baby. So I want to first say thank you for joining us and doing this interview today, and we'll just jump right in. So what was your experience like with your first miscarriage? And I know that you've had miscarriages prior to this particular relationship.
In the beginning, when I was younger, it wasn't seemingly as important as it is now. I was in a different place when I was a younger person. And I also didn't know much in a way of how the body goes through so much stuff as being pregnant and just a terrible toll it can take on the woman's body.
Okay, so what was your experience with like our first two miscarriages? Because
the first, I look at both of them as having been possible treasures that were lost to us. When I thought about our first one, I remember getting the first sort of tinglings of what are you going to be as a father? How are you going to sort of conduct yourself as a model for your child? That's what I felt with the first, the awakenings of a particular sort of fatherhood. The second loss was
after we had the third IUI cycle.
after the third IUI cycle.
Yeah.
Was even more hurtful, because at that point I had even allowed myself to begin to feel more and I had started to do things to prepare to be a father. Not knowing what I was doing, but still trying to mentally prepare to be a father.
Interesting. So what was IUI like for you?
For me?
I mean, starting fertility treatments in and of itself is a thing, but I mean, even if, I guess, well, yeah, because you had to participate in IUI in various different ways, so.
Strange. I mean, I'd never gone through, seriously, you know, I mean, you know, you learn in school about the birds and the bees and how things happen, and you don't think about any sort of issues or anything that comes up, any sort of problems with fertility. So it was at first very strange to have to go through certain things, to have to talk about the particular sort of drugs that we were going to use, and just it felt, I don't want to use the word unnatural, but it was like it was very challenging that way, because it sort of defied the whole idea of a natural sort of way of making children and having babies. Something that I've never actually even experienced in my own family or my own life.
Right. So what was the most awkward part about beginning that process for you?
Having to go into the clinic and actually produce a specimen. That was an issue. I suppose being in the business that they're in, it's a routine for them.
Right.
For me, it wasn't. So you take me. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going on. They put you in this room with this terrible looking computer screen, and then these choices of like erotica, and then you're supposed to perform and do things, and just, it was, like I said, once again, going back to that whole thing of the idea of natural childbirth, it was very alien to me and very strange.
So I know that we went through 3 rounds of IUI. What was that like as far as, learning the process of it?
So for me, the 2 worst parts was scheduling, having to stay on that schedule, having to make myself, and you having to make yourself available in a timely fashion to do injections. And then the worst part was learning to do injections, being fearful that you've got all these fears in your head that you're going to insert the needle and break it, or you're gonna push too fast, and you see all these movies about putting air bubbles into someone and they die from a heart attack, all kinds of craziness. So having to go on YouTube and watch injection after injection after injection, and then doing the first one, it was a lot. It was daunting in that sense, like, whew, this is a lot to go through. But then after a while, it became sort of routine.
Yeah.
I still can give someone a shot now, but it's just like
Is that something you want to do?
No. Just the very beginning, it was rough. The very
Okay.
beginning was rough.
So, how did you feel about, the change in sex life? Because we went from having one to being on this very regimented schedule of
Right.
needles, and so how did that change for you as far as intimacy?
So of course that changes one's stress levels. That changes the idea of, once again, with the scheduling. You live in a world where everything is scheduled except for something like that. Like, you don't schedule intimacy, not necessarily. So
Right.
having to do that was strange in and of itself. And going back to, once again, that whole model and idea of, birth and conception only happening that natural sort of way. This was just so far out there. It was just, in that term, difficult to get in the very beginning, because it's just, like I said, you're scheduling something that's supposed to, occur naturally in a moment.
Okay.
So that took getting used to.
Tell me about your feelings about after getting pregnant after IVF.
Excitement, and finally the thought and idea that everything was ended in terms of that process of getting it all there. Like, was finally okay. We finally got it. We're there. That was a general feeling.
Went through 27 weeks of pregnancy.
Right.
And then complete disappointment. Tell me about the night that we went to the hospital, basically. Like, what was that like for you, that whole day?
Well, scary. I mean, the idea and having, the whole idea of the male protectorate sort of personality. When you have nothing to fight against, you feel almost helpless. And it was very difficult to see you in that state and see this occurring. And there was nothing I could do about it. It was absolutely nothing. All I could do was be a participant in terms of watching. I just was just standing there, just watching it all happen.
How did that affect other parts of your life at that time?
I mean, a loss of life at any stage is stressful and tends to turn everything up. So little things become big things. You find yourself becoming frustrated or emotional for almost apparently no reason, no known reason at that time. It's just like a turn up on everything. And I remember just feeling initially raw and sort of frozen at the same time. It's very difficult to describe.
So, like, as we were going to the hospital, like, what were the thoughts in your mind?
That we were losing our child. And
I don't think I thought that yet.
trying to be calm and have hope at the same time, and not be hysterical and not get you riled up.
I honestly just thought I was going into labor early.
Wow.
And that the baby was going to the NICU. I did not think that. Like, that was like not in my head at all.
Right.
So
It was in my-
when they once they put me on the monitor and we didn't hear a heartbeat, then I obviously was like, okay, he's gone. But did you think that I would have to actually deliver him?
I did not think that. I honestly, at that point, I didn't have any thoughts at that point as to how we were going to handle and deal with Caleb. Like, like I said, I felt raw and frozen at the same time. Like, there wasn't a thought.
While we were at the hospital, what was a moment that you remember significantly, like an interaction with another family member that was like super significant for you?
Well, there was the idea. It was two. It was one out in the hallway with my father-in-law. He, of course, was hysterical. And I came out of the room to try to like breathe and concentrate. And he was crying, and he started to come towards me crying. And I yelled out, "Don't touch me!" And I didn't do it to be mean. I just yelled out, "Don't touch me," because I felt like if he would have touched me, I just would have lost it. And part of me wanted to remain as calm as possible for everybody involved. The second and most important thing that happened.
But that's interesting that you're saying that. Like, you're trying to stay calm for everybody else. But what about you? It was happening.
Yeah, what about
to
me?
you?
Yeah, that's so true. What about me? I don't know. That was just what was in my head. I mean, I wasn't at that time particularly registering my own suffering forwardly. It was sort of here, but it was more about trying to be calm and be strong, you know,
That's the first time I ever saw you cry.
As we're taught to be. Yeah.
So there were so many people in and out. Was there somebody that you wanted to come at a particular point that didn't show up for you, that you feel like should have been there for you?
I went up and down with that because the way I felt, because of my feelings of wanting to be, which I guess essentially is a way of trying to be in control, right? I, in a way, felt like at times I didn't need anybody to be there.
Okay.
Later on, I felt that I wanted somebody to be there, but that was, I guess after thinking about it and sort of dealing with my own emotional content in this scene. But initially I was more worried about you, per se, and more worried about how I would react outwardly.
Do you have any feelings about the fact that we didn't get to bury him ourselves and he's like in Pottersfield? Yes.
Not
I still feel guilty every day.
Yeah, I don't feel good about it. I mean, and not that I would have visited his grave all the time or something like that. It just was, I felt almost like, and I asked him, I said, what do you do? And he was like, no, we buried him. Because it almost felt like a throwaway. Like I just felt really bad like that. And I mean, I know we sort of like thought about it in the moment. We were like, go and don't have it.
I think it's unfair to ask somebody to choose something of that magnitude
right at that moment.
In those moments, like you lost your child, and then you have to decide all of these things, and
right then and there.
I don't know. You're not in a clear headspace.
Right.
I think it's kind of not okay almost to do that. So
I think that people don't prepare for things like that because you don't think that you're going to lose your child.
No.
So you don't prepare and say, okay, so if this happens, we need to think about some stuff, because first of all, you don't even want to think that.
Right.
That's not even something that comes into your brain on a regular basis. So trying to prepare for something that you don't want to happen just is like,
it's crazy.
Yeah, who would think of that?
Yeah. It's crazy. I feel like, watching you go through that process was interesting because you were in a vulnerable state and you hardly ever allow yourself to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to watch you have so many emotions. So yeah, and I think one thing that you mentioned, like having to be strong for everybody else and be there for everybody else, like that's something I think I experienced as well, because I'm going through this, but they're all upset and crying. Mm-hmm. And every time you think you said, this is what happened to the last person, there's somebody else who goes, oh, by the way. So I don't know how that affected you, like going back to work or...
That was terrible having to tell so you start to try and process and deal with your loss. And then there are people that you don't see for months on end, or you see them a year later, and you have to explain that your child died.
Right.
And it's like you have to watch them go through a minuscule sort of emotional content that you went through, but you have to watch them go through it. So therefore, you experience it again, and then you have to be like, calm down. So I dreaded bumping into somebody that I hadn't seen in a year.
Right.
So I could tell them, yes, my son passed away. Like, it just heated.
How did it affect the kids that you work with? Because I know you do work with youth and young adults. And
so it's funny when I went back to work, because they're children who are in a state of emotional
turmoil.
Yeah, turmoil is a good term. A lot of people shut down and don't even mention it, don't even talk about it. It's taboo. And a lot of the men that I worked with and male friends shrugged it off. Like, we think about these things different, son. Like, we can, and I get that. I get the idea that, you can never feel it the way the mother feels it, and it's in her body, and, she feels the kicking and the moving and all of that, and she has to deliver the baby. So there's a point where we are sort of removed, but not that removed. I was surprised that people were saying, we're it's not the same for us, and I felt a significant loss. My son was gone. But I understood where they were coming from with that. And then I also understood that for them, generally speaking, a lot of people who experience loss in that term, a lot of times experience miscarriages. So they don't see,
right,
a full-blown child, a baby. So, and I think that's what was in their head as well. They didn't know it was 24 plus weeks. Like, they didn't,
Right. Yeah, because a lot of people most people are generally surprised whenever I had to deliver him. And they're like, you did what? I'm like, well, he was a baby.
Yeah.
He was a small baby. He was only 1 pound and 9 ounces,
right.
But he was still a baby. And so the only way for him to come out was for me to deliver him. So that's usually kind of people's shock. Okay, so you took Caleb from me and went into an adjacent room for what purpose?
Right, so you were asking about did I get any mental health sort of things, and to me, I had did this sort of goodbye thing. I took him in there and I unwrapped him and I looked at all his toes and looked at all his fingers, and I took off his hat and I rubbed his head, and then I just looked at him and I took it all in. And I wrapped him back up, and I kind of just said goodbye. And I convinced myself, because I truly, surely should have or could have spoken to someone, but I convinced myself that sort of ritual was my way of cleansing myself at that time, mentally, not emotionally, and trying to say goodbye to our son. But in retrospect, definitely should have spoken to somebody.
Our son was gone. Mm-hmm. We were trying to figure out what our next steps were. We were thankful that we had money from my grandfather to store our eggs.
Right.
What were your thoughts about starting IVF again?
It was twofold. Like, at this time, I was raw and possibly very irritable, very emotional, very quick to anger, quick to pain. Very depressed. And the idea of doing that all over again, going through the stabbings, the needle, giving you the needle, and other things, just it was difficult.
Okay.
I mean, my initial response was, I can't go through that again. And I wasn't even the one who was going through all of the sort of chemical changes and getting, the syringes and all that stuff. So just because, once again, it's, you're an outsider, you're just watching, you're spectating.
No, you participated because you have to give the needles.
Yeah, I mean, but it's not.
It's not the same level of participation.
Right.
So yeah.
And it was hard to watch you go through that. It was hard to watch you go through all of those body changes in order to have a child. It was difficult. So my initial feeling was, I can't do this again. I can't. That was my initial feeling. It changed, but initially that was my first response.
So I just want to talk about leaving the hospital the first time and how different that was leaving the hospital after Kaden was born, and like that feeling. Because for me, I would say like leaving the hospital the first time empty-handed sucked.
Yeah, that was because once again, you as a parent or a beginning parent, you don't think of the possibility of your child. Children are not supposed to die. So you don't think any of these scenarios that happen are going to happen. So you don't think that you may possibly go to the hospital and not come back with a newborn. So of course it was devastating. It was devastating. And then having to watch your body go through what it goes through after you have a child and don't have a child. So your body's acting and reacting as if it had a child. If there's a child here and there's no child here.
Right, like when we were standing in CVS.
Right. So it's just like
my breast started leaking and I was freaking out.
Right, and that's crazy. So it's just like it's hard to leave the hospital, and then you have all these signs and symptoms in your body that say this is for the baby, and there's no baby.
Right. So what was the experience of being pregnant with Kaden for you?
That was rough on me.
I think if you could have just sat me in the china closet, you would have.
Yeah, I would have. I surely would have. It was the most frightening thing I've ever been through. Because while I wanted to maintain a sense of happiness and a sense of we're going to be parents, I always had in the back of my mind, Kaden, and for me, one of the most traumatic things, and this is why I said later on, the idea of talking to someone and getting those feelings out would have helped, is because one of the most traumatic things for me was going to the hospital and having to listen to Kaden's heartbeat. And I didn't know. I remember the second time it happened, I started to sweat and hyperventilate, and I had to get control of myself.
Wow.
And I didn't really understand what happened. And later on, I was like, it was the heart monitor. Because that's what would happen with Caleb all the time. Like, we go to the heart monitor. And I couldn't stand. To this day, I still can't stand hearing that sound. I have it on my phone. When you said it to me one day, I still can't stand hearing that sound.
Really?
Still. Yeah, that was a piece of trauma for me. So I felt distant from it. I was happy, but I was kind of like this because I was afraid to go through that. Because I remember laying there and feeling Caleb move or respond to our voices. So that brought up a sense of, this is, I'm going to happen. It's going to be a father, and to go through that again. Whew,
Was it difficult to even kind of feel Kaden's heartbeat when I was pregnant with him, or
Yeah, it was all difficult because it was a reenactment, and I just and understand I didn't fully understand what was happening at the time, but I remember sometimes getting nauseous going to the hospital. I was like, God, what is going on? And I thought maybe it was the smells or childhood trauma from when I broke my leg and I spent eight weeks in the hospital or whatever. But no, it was literally because I was going through what we went through with Caleb, and I didn't realize till later on.
So the rainbow baby comes, and then what?
At first, still nervousness. I remember when they took him out, and he's crying and everything is fine for the most part, but he's a little early, so he's having respiratory issues.
Which nobody told me about.
Right, they did. So I followed him to the NICU, and he's laying there, and I can't go inside, but I'm watching the doctor poke at him. So she's poking at him, and he's swinging his hands. And I remember going, swing your hands. That's right, keep swinging your hands, because I realized that she's trying to gauge his response. So I was happy that he was responding well and reacting well. But initially, the first 2 days or so, it was just a big jumble of happy but nervous because, you know, he is here, but I can tell he's having some labored breath. And, you know, the doctor did say he's a little early, so, you know, but he's in time enough. And then understanding the doctor wanted to do that because he didn't want us to have the same sort of issues that we had the first time. So I know he was out early, you know, so I was nervous. I was happy, but I was nervous too. You know, and as time went on, it got better, but initially I was nervous and happy.
So I just want to go back a little bit because I wasn't thinking about this then, but we had a niece shortly thereafter we lost Caleb. But did that have any impact on you at all? Like,
I was very happy for them. And I look at her. Sometimes I look at her and I can see, which is, you know, not to be all symbolic and spiritual, but I can see Caleb standing next to her. You know, and it's just like, because they were born nearly the same time.
Yeah.
You know, so it was like I look at her sometimes and go, God, so he would have been running around with her. You know, and she's very attached to Caden. You know, but I sometimes think and wonder, like, how would they react and interact with each other? You know, the way she's so close and attached to Caden, how would she been with Caleb? You know.
yeah.
So I was happy. I was very happy for them. But sometimes I look at them like, wow, you know, I remember.
If you could say one thing to a guy who is going through fertility stuff with their partner, wife, what would you say? One thing you did say was go to mental health counseling.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
But is there anything else?
I definitely would say that. And I also would say it's not an easy road. And you know, understand that a lot of things there's no hands-on that you can do and make things happen or make things better. So a lot of times you're going to be just patting on the back and saying everything's going to be okay. And you're going to have to be satisfied with that. You know, because it is difficult just to be standing there and watching everything that's happening. You know, but definitely, yeah, go speak to somebody. Definitely speak to somebody. I know it's not commonplace for us to do that. But, yeah.
Especially as people of color.
Yeah, definitely should.
It's not like, it's kind of almost still taboo even now.
It is.
So I just want to say thank you for sharing your experience with child loss and fertility treatments and just being open enough to share what that's like. A lot of guys don't talk about it. And I just want to be able to give, you know, them some encouragement so that they know that they're not alone. Because I think as a people, we don't talk about things anyway. But when it comes to men, it's definitely like double locked down on conversation. So I appreciate the fact that you were open enough to have this conversation. And I hope that in the future we'll be able to, you know, incorporate some other men and maybe have a roundtable discussion where you guys just sit and talk about, you know, some of these topics.
Good stuff.
Thank you.